The night a man like Ethan Cole finally noticed me, I was wearing the same gray sweater I had worn 3 times that week. Outside the 42nd floor windows, Manhattan was drowning in rain. Water raced down the glass in silver lines, blurring the city into something distant and unreal. Inside, the office was nearly empty. Nearly everyone had gone home hours earlier. I knew because I had watched the elevators carry them away, one tired employee at a time, while I stayed behind with a spreadsheet, a cup of cold coffee, and a problem nobody else had noticed. My name was Claire Bennett. I was 28 years old. I wore glasses, I color-coded my calendar, and most people in Ethan Cole's world looked directly through me without realizing it. That was usually fine with me. Invisible people heard things. Invisible people noticed patterns. Invisible people survived offices full of powerful men by understanding exactly when to speak and when to stay quiet. Ethan Cole was the reason everyone else spoke carefully. He owned businesses people recognized, buildings people pointed at, and enough influence to make a room change temperature when he entered it. I had been his secretary for 11 months. In that time, I had learned the sound of his footsteps, the exact way he preferred his coffee, and the difference between his thoughtful silence and the silence that meant everyone else should stop talking. I had also learned something else. Ethan noticed everything, except me. At least, that was what I believed. The clock on my computer read 9:47 when I found the error. It was buried between 2 columns of numbers, hidden inside a projected acquisition schedule. Nothing dramatic, just a date entered incorrectly, which shifted a chain of calculations and made an entire forecast look better than it should have. I stared at the screen. Then I checked it again. And again. My coffee had gone cold an hour earlier, but I drank it anyway. That cannot be right, I whispered. I opened another file. Then another. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. By the time I found the original source, rain was tapping harder against the windows. I was so focused that I did not hear the elevator. Open. What are you still doing here? I froze. Ethan Cole stood a few feet from my desk, his dark suit jacket still perfectly pressed, his expression unreadable. I slowly looked up at him over the edge of my glasses. Working. His eyes moved to my screen. It is almost 10. I noticed. Then why are you here? I hesitated. Because someone made a mistake. His gaze sharpened. Someone. I turned my monitor slightly toward him. The revised schedule uses the wrong closing date. Everything after that is calculated from the error. He stepped closer. Not close enough to make me uncomfortable. Just close enough for me to notice the rain-darkened reflection of his suit in my computer screen. He leaned down and studied the numbers. The office became very quiet. I waited for him to tell me I was wrong. Instead, he reached for the mouse and opened the source file himself. His eyes moved across the screen. Once. Twice. Then he stopped. You found this? Yes. When? About 30 minutes ago. He looked at me. Really looked at me. It was different from the quick glance he usually gave when handing me a folder or asking about his schedule. His gray-blue eyes held mine for 1 second too long. Why did you not call me? I shrugged. Because I was still checking. Checking what? Whether I was right. Something changed in his expression. Not surprise exactly. Something quieter. I looked back at the spreadsheet because suddenly looking at him felt more dangerous than finding an error in a multi-million-dollar forecast. Claire. My hand stopped above the keyboard. I had heard him say my name before. Hundreds of times. Usually followed by an instruction. Usually without him looking at me. But this time was different. I lifted my eyes. Ethan was still standing beside my desk. The rain pressed against the windows. Somewhere far below, a siren disappeared into the city. Yes. I asked. He said nothing. And for the first time in 11 months, I had the strange and unsettling feeling that Ethan Cole had finally decided to see me. What are you still looking at? I asked, because apparently that was the only defense I had left. Ethan blinked once, as if I had pulled him out of a thought he had not expected to have. Then his eyes moved back to the screen. The numbers. That is a lie. His gaze returned to mine. I immediately wished I had not said it. Not because I was afraid of him. At least, not exactly. It was because people did not usually accuse Ethan Cole of lying in the middle of an empty office at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night. A strange silence settled between us. Then, to my surprise, the corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. Ethan Cole probably had people who handled actual smiles for him. You are very direct for someone who works for me, he said. I leaned back in my chair. I have been working for you for 11 months. You should know that by now. I am beginning to realize there are several things I should know by now. The words landed more heavily than I expected. Before I could decide what to say, he reached for the printed report beside my keyboard. His fingers paused over the sticky notes I had covered in small handwriting. You checked every number? The important ones. There are 37 pages. 38. He looked at the report. 38. The revised appendix was added this afternoon. For a second, neither of us spoke. Rain slid down the windows behind him, turning the lights of the city into long ribbons of gold and red. Ethan looked back at me, and something about his expression made me suddenly aware of the old gray sweater I was wearing, the messy knot of hair at the back of my head, and the fact that my glasses had slowly slipped down my nose. I pushed them back into place. So, I said, clearing my throat, now that we have established the company is not about to embarrass itself in front of 300 people next week, can I go home? No, I stared at him. That sounded less like gratitude than I expected. I meant, do not go home yet. That sounded worse. This time, he actually smiled. It was brief, almost reluctant. But I saw it. I had worked outside his office for nearly a year, and I could count the number of times I had seen Ethan Cole smile without using all the fingers on one hand. He seemed to notice my surprise, and his expression returned to normal. Have dinner with me. The room became quiet again. I looked at him. Excuse me. Dinner. I heard the word. Then what is the problem? I slowly stood from my chair. The problem is that you said it like an instruction. His eyebrows lowered slightly. I am inviting you. No. You are giving me an assignment with a restaurant involved. For several seconds, Ethan said nothing. Somewhere in the hallway, the elevator doors opened and closed again, reminding me that the rest of the building still existed. He looked toward the rain-covered windows, then back at me. All right. I crossed my arms. All right, what? His expression told me he was not used to conversations like this. That was becoming increasingly obvious. Claire, he said carefully, would you have dinner with me? The difference was only a few words. But I heard it. So did he. I tilted my head. Tonight. Tonight. Why? He did not answer immediately. That was the first surprise. The second was that he seemed almost irritated by the question, not with me, but with himself for not having an answer ready. Because, he finally said, I have worked 20 feet away from you for almost a year, and tonight I realized I do not know anything about you. I looked at him through my glasses. That is not exactly reassuring. It was not supposed to be. Good. Because I am not sure whether to be flattered or concerned. His eyes held mine again. Which one are you? I gathered my bag from beside the desk and slipped it over my shoulder. I have not decided. Ethan nodded once. Then have dinner with me and decide. I should have said no. Everything about the situation suggested that no was the sensible answer. He was my boss. He was powerful. He was used to getting what he wanted. And suddenly, after 11 months of barely noticing me, he wanted to know who I was. But there was something different in the way he stood there now. He was waiting. Not assuming. Not ordering. Waiting. I looked at the clock. Then at the rain. Then back at Ethan Cole. 1 hour, I said. His eyes narrowed slightly. For dinner. For me to go home and change out of this sweater. Another. Almost smile appeared. 7:30? I nodded. 7:30. I walked toward the elevator before I could change my mind. But just as the doors opened, I heard him behind me. Claire. I turned. He was still standing beside my desk, surrounded by the quiet office and the rain-dark city beyond the glass. Yes. For a moment, he said nothing. Then his voice became quieter. Do not change too much. The elevator doors began to close. I looked at him one last time. You should be careful, Mr. Cole. About what? The doors narrowed between us. You might be disappointed when you realize I am exactly who you thought I was. The last thing I saw before the elevator closed completely was Ethan looking at me as if that possibility had never crossed his mind. And for the first time that night, I wondered if dinner was going to change more than either of us expected. By 7:28, I was standing outside the restaurant wondering why I had agreed to this. The rain had slowed to a mist, and the sidewalks glowed beneath the streetlights like the whole city had been polished while I was gone. I had changed, technically. I was wearing a simple navy dress, a long black coat, and the same glasses I wore every day. My hair was down instead of tied in a knot. That was the full extent of my transformation. I had stared at myself in the mirror for 5 minutes before leaving my apartment and decided that if Ethan Cole expected me to arrive looking like someone else, he was about to be disappointed. At exactly 7:30, a black car stopped at the curb. The rear door opened, but no one stepped out. I looked toward the driver. "Is Mr. Cole inside?" The driver nodded politely. "Yes, Miss Bennett." I got into the car and immediately regretted it. Not because anything was wrong, but because Ethan was sitting beside me, looking exactly as he had at the office. Dark suit, calm expression, perfect posture, as if inviting his secretary to dinner was something he did every Thursday. "You are early," he said. I glanced at my watch. It is 7:30. Exactly. That is what being on time means. Something flickered in his eyes. "I know. Do you?" The car pulled away from the curb. For a few seconds, Ethan looked out the window. "You always talk to me like this?" "Only when you ask unusual questions." He turned toward me. "And you consider this unusual? Do you often take your employees to dinner after discovering they can read spreadsheets?" His mouth almost moved into a smile. "Almost. No, then I would call it unusual." The restaurant was quiet and elegant without feeling like it was trying too hard. Soft music drifted through the room. Warm light reflected against dark wood. A host greeted Ethan by name, but Ethan did not make a show of it. He simply followed her toward a table near the window and waited for me to sit before taking his own seat. I noticed that. I did not say anything. A server placed menus in front of us. Ethan barely looked at his. I looked at mine for an unreasonably long time because suddenly I had no idea what to do with my hands. "You can order whatever you want," he said. I lowered the menu. That is usually how restaurants work. There it was. The smile again. Brief, reluctant, and somehow more surprising than it should have been. I looked down at the menu to hide my own reaction. "You are different outside the office," I said. "How?" "Quieter. You think I am loud at the office?" "No. That would be easier." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Explain." I set the menu down. "You do not have to raise your voice. Everyone watches you anyway." His expression became still. "Do you watch me?" The question caught me off guard. I looked toward the window, where rainwater slid slowly down the glass. "It is difficult not to when your office is 20 feet from my desk." That was not an answer. I looked back at him. "Then yes, I watch you." The words landed between us before I could soften them. Ethan did not look away. Neither did I. For one strange second, the entire restaurant seemed to disappear. Then the server returned, and I ordered the first thing I could pronounce without thinking. When she left, Ethan leaned back in his chair. "I expected you to change." I narrowed my eyes. "You told me not to." "I know. Then why are you surprised?" He looked at me for a moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "Because most people change when they know who they are sitting across from." I adjusted my glasses. "Maybe I do not." His eyes stayed on mine. "You know exactly who I am, Claire." I held his gaze. "No, Ethan. I know what everyone says you are." The silence that followed was different from the ones before. He did not look offended. He looked almost interested. I folded my hands on the table. Those are not always the same thing. For the first time that night, Ethan Cole had no immediate response. And as the rain continued to trace silver lines across the window beside us, I realized that the man across the table was not staring at me because I had changed. He was staring because I had not. The server placed our plates on the table, and for a few minutes, neither of us said anything. I was grateful for the interruption. Ethan had a way of looking at silence as if it were another negotiation, something he could wait out until the other person gave him what he wanted. I was beginning to suspect that was why people found him intimidating. Not because he always demanded answers. Sometimes he simply waited. I picked up my fork. "So," I said, "are you going to keep staring at me?" His expression did not change. "Probably." I looked down at my plate. "At least you are honest." "You prefer that?" "I prefer knowing what people are doing." "And what do you think I am doing?" I looked back at him, trying to figure me out. For the first time since we arrived, Ethan looked genuinely uncertain. It lasted less than a second. "Am I that obvious?" "To me? Yes." He leaned back slightly. "Then tell me what you think you know." I almost laughed. "That sounds like a trap." "It is dinner, Claire. You say that as if dinner cannot be dangerous." His eyes narrowed with quiet amusement. "Dangerous? Emotionally. Not everything has to involve dramatic lighting and expensive furniture." He looked around the restaurant. "You notice the furniture?" "I notice everything." "I know." The answer was so immediate that I paused. "You know?" Ethan looked at his glass, then back at me. I know now. Something about those two words made the air between us feel heavier. I set my fork down. Can I ask you something? You have been doing that all night. No, I mean something real. His expression became still. Ask. I studied him for a moment. There were probably 1,000 questions I could have chosen. Questions about his businesses, his reputation, the private calls that sometimes made his entire office go silent. Questions everyone else would have been too careful to ask. Instead, I chose the one that seemed to matter most. When was the last time you had dinner with someone who was not afraid of you? His hand stopped beside his glass. I watched his face carefully. No anger, no irritation, just silence. The kind I had never seen from him before. Outside, a taxi moved through the wet street below, its headlights stretching across the glass. Ethan looked toward the window. I do not know, he said. I blinked. You do not know? No. I waited for the usual correction. The polished answer. The confident explanation. None came. That is a surprisingly honest response. You asked for something real. I looked down at the table. I did. He was quiet for another moment. Then he asked, Are you afraid of me? I considered lying. It would have been easier. Sometimes. His eyes returned to mine. Sometimes. You are powerful. People act differently around you. I would have to be careless not to notice that. But you are not afraid now. No, why? I folded my hands together. Because I think being powerful and being frightening are not always the same thing. Ethan said nothing. I continued before I could lose my nerve. And because you asked me to dinner instead of telling me to come. His expression shifted. Small. Almost invisible. But I saw it. That mattered, he asked. Yes. It was only a sentence. No, I shook my head. It was a choice. The music in the restaurant changed. Somewhere behind us, glasses touched softly. Ethan looked at me as if I had just explained something in a language he had been hearing his entire life, but had never understood. You think I do not give people choices. I think you are used to deciding before other people get the chance. He lowered his eyes. And you? What about me? Do you always say exactly what you think? I smiled faintly. Only when someone asks. He looked up again. Then I should probably be careful what I ask you. That, I said, reaching for my glass, might be the smartest thing you have said all night. For the first time, Ethan laughed. It was quiet and brief, but completely real. And somehow, hearing it unsettled me more than his silence had. Because for a moment, the powerful man everyone else seemed to see disappeared. And sitting across from me was simply Ethan. Then he leaned forward slightly and asked, All right, Claire, your turn. What did you want to be before you became my secretary? I looked at him. The question was simple, but the answer was not. I lowered my eyes to the untouched edge of my plate. That depends, I said quietly. On what? I looked back at him. On whether you are ready for an answer you cannot control. For a moment, I considered telling him the easy version. The version people liked because it fit neatly into a conversation. I could have said that I studied business, that I wanted stability, that I became a secretary because the position was available and I was good at it. None of that would have been a lie. It just would not have been the truth he was asking for. I traced one finger along the edge of my glass. I wanted to be an architect, I said. Ethan watched me carefully. Wanted. That is what I said. Why not? I smiled faintly. You really do not waste time. You told me to ask. I did. The smile disappeared. I looked toward the window, where the rain had finally begun to slow. I was good at it. At least, that is what everyone told me. Everyone. Professors. My parents. People who saw my sketches and immediately started planning my future for me. Ethan remained quiet. I got into a program in Boston. I continued. It was exactly what I was supposed to want. Good school. Good opportunity. A career people would understand. But, I let out a quiet breath. But every conversation about my future sounded like someone else was describing a life I had agreed to live. His eyes narrowed slightly. So you walked away? Not immediately. I smiled at the memory, though there was not much humor in it. I spent almost 2 years convincing myself that being unhappy was just part of being ambitious. Ethan said nothing. I continued. Then one morning, I was sitting in a studio at 6:15, staring at a model I had spent 3 nights building, and I realized I could not remember the last time I had made something because I wanted to. The words settled between us. So I left. Just like that. Nothing important is ever just like that. He lowered his eyes briefly. I took a sip of water. I finished what I needed to finish. I moved back to New York. I took jobs that paid my rent. Eventually, I became very good at organizing other people's lives. And now you organize mine. Mostly. His expression softened. Do you regret it? The question was quieter than the others. I thought about it. Really thought about it. Sometimes, I said. But not for the reason people assume. What reason? I miss drawing. Ethan looked at me for a long moment. Then why did you stop? I laughed softly. That is the thing. I did not. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small black notebook. Its corners were worn, and the elastic band around it had stretched with age. I placed it on the table between us. Ethan looked down at it. What is that? The part nobody at the office sees. He hesitated before opening it. Inside were pages filled with sketches, buildings, windows, street corners, coffee cups, hands holding umbrellas beneath the rain. The view from my apartment. The view from the office. His office. Ethan turned another page. Then another. You drew these? No. I hired a very talented invisible artist. His eyes lifted toward me. I smiled. Yes, I drew them. He looked back at the notebook, and something in his expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition, maybe. This one, he said, touching a sketch of the office windows, was from last winter. I stared at him. How do you know that? The building across the street had those decorations only in December. I blinked. Then I smiled despite myself. So you do notice things. Apparently, I do. His fingers rested lightly on the edge of the notebook. Why hide this? I looked at him. I do not hide it. I just do not show it to people who think they are entitled to understand everything about me. His hand stopped. I knew immediately that I had hit something. Ethan slowly closed the notebook and pushed it back toward me. Fair. The word was simple, but he said it without defensiveness, without trying to explain himself. I slipped the notebook back into my bag. You know what the strange part is? I asked. What? People thought I gave up when I left architecture. Ethan watched me. But you do not think you did. No, I shook my head. I think I finally stopped letting other people decide what success was supposed to look like. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. Ethan leaned back in his chair, looking at me with an expression I could not read. Then he said, I do not think anyone has ever said that to me before. Said what? His eyes held mine. That walking away can be a form of winning. I felt something shift inside me. Small. Unexpected. Maybe that is because you have spent your whole life building things you were afraid to lose. His expression became still. For 1 second, I thought I had gone too far. Then Ethan looked down at his untouched glass. You may be right, he said. And somehow, that answer told me more about him than anything I had learned in 11 months. The restaurant had grown quieter by the time Ethan looked up again. Most of the nearby tables were empty now, and the candles had burned low enough to make the shadows on the walls seem softer. I expected him to change the subject. Instead, he rested his hands on the table and said, My father believed walking away was weakness. I did not interrupt. There was something different in his voice. It was no longer the voice he used in meetings, where every sentence sounded measured before it reached the room. This was slower, less protected. What did you believe? I asked. Ethan looked toward the window. I believed him for a long time. And now, his gaze returned to mine. Now I am not sure what I believe. I nodded once. That sounds inconvenient. A quiet smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. You have no idea. I am beginning to. The server approached and asked if we wanted dessert. I expected Ethan to decline. Instead, he looked at me. Do you? I blinked. Are you asking because you want dessert, or because you are conducting a survey? I am asking because I do not know what you want. The answer was so direct that I stared at him. Then I laughed. That might be the most honest thing you have said tonight. I am improving. Slowly. He ordered 2 slices of chocolate cake before I could object. I did not say I wanted chocolate. You smiled when you saw it on the menu. I stared at him. You noticed that? Apparently, I noticed things. I shook my head, but I could not stop smiling. When the cake arrived, I took 1 bite and immediately regretted every negative thought I had ever had about expensive restaurants. Ethan watched me with obvious amusement. Good. Do not ruin this moment. I am only asking. Then yes, it is annoyingly good. He picked up his fork, but did not eat. You are different when you forget to be careful. The words made me pause. I am not careful. You are. He leaned back. You use humor when you do not want people to know something matters to you. I set my fork down. That is a very bold observation for a man who needed 6 months to notice what I ate for lunch. I noticed. You did not. You bring the same sandwich every Tuesday. I stared at him. Turkey and avocado. His expression remained perfectly calm. On wheat bread. No cheese. I narrowed my eyes. That is unsettling. You are the one who said you notice everything. That does not mean I keep a private record of your sandwiches. For a second, he looked almost embarrassed. It disappeared quickly, but not before I saw it. And that was when I understood something strange. Ethan was not simply learning about me tonight. He had been paying attention long before this dinner. The realization should have made me uncomfortable. Instead, it made my chest feel unexpectedly warm. Why did you invite me? I asked. The question ended whatever humor had been between us. Ethan placed his fork down. You know why. I know why you told me. And I think there is more. He looked at me for a long time. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The streets were still wet, reflecting the city lights in long, trembling lines. This morning, he finally said, you corrected me in front of 6 executives. I closed my eyes. I was hoping you had forgotten that. I have not. I can apologize. Do not. I opened my eyes. You are impossible. You were right. I blinked. About the projections? Yes. You are admitting that. Do not make me repeat myself. I smiled. Noted. But Ethan did not smile back. His expression had turned serious again. Everyone else in that room knew I was wrong. I stopped smiling. How do you know? Because I could see it. His voice lowered. But nobody said anything. I looked at him. And that bothered you. It should bother anyone. Does it? He held my gaze. It does now. The answer settled heavily between us. I thought about the man who could make an entire conference room silent without raising his voice. I thought about how lonely that kind of power must be. Not because people hated you. Maybe something worse. Maybe because they agreed with you before you even spoke. That is not respect, I said quietly. Ethan looked at me. No, it is fear. His jaw tightened slightly, but he did not deny it. I leaned back in my chair. Then maybe you should stop rewarding people for being afraid. His eyes narrowed. You make everything sound simple. No, I make it sound honest. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan looked down at the small silver watch on his wrist. You know what I thought before tonight? That I was going to embarrass you by ordering dessert? No, I waited. He looked at me again, and his voice softened in a way I had never heard before. I thought I was inviting my secretary to dinner. My breath caught, though I did not understand why. Ethan continued. I was wrong. I tried to smile. You seem to be saying that a lot tonight. But he did not look amused. Claire, he said quietly, I do not think I know who you are at all. And for the first time that evening, I was the one who did not have an answer. For the first time that night, I understood why he had gone silent. It was not because Ethan had run out of questions. It was because he had finally asked one he could not answer for himself. I looked at the candle between us. The flame moved every time the air shifted, small and stubborn. That makes 2 of us, I said. Ethan frowned slightly. You do not know who you are. I know who I am. I looked back at him. I am just not sure which version of me people are looking for when they ask. He studied me. Explain. At work, I am your secretary. Yes. To my parents, I am the daughter who left a perfectly respectable career path and took a job they still do not completely understand. A small smile touched my mouth. To my friends, I am apparently the person who overthinks everything. You do. Thank you, Ethan. It was not criticism. That almost makes it worse. He smiled, but I continued before the moment could become too easy. And when I am alone, I draw. I read. I take long walks through neighborhoods where nobody knows me. Sometimes I want a life that looks impressive. Sometimes I want a small apartment with terrible sunlight and enough time to drink coffee before it gets cold. His expression softened. That does not sound complicated. It is when everyone expects you to choose one version and stay there. Ethan looked down. I noticed the way his thumb moved once against the side of his glass. I know something about that. Do you? Everyone sees what they expect to see. His voice had changed again. Quiet. Distant. The businessman. The man who owns half the room before he walks into it. I tilted my head. And what do you see? He looked at me. Someone who has spent too long becoming useful to other people. The answer landed harder than I expected. I did not make a joke this time. I simply watched him. That sounds lonely. His eyes did not leave mine. It can be. For a few seconds, Neither of us spoke. The restaurant had nearly emptied around us. Chairs were being placed upside down on distant tables. The music had become softer, almost invisible beneath the low murmur of the remaining staff. Ethan glanced toward the entrance, then back at me. You should probably go home. I blinked. Are you firing me? No, then why? Do you sound so serious? Because it is late. I checked my phone and raised my eyebrows. You invited me to dinner, Ethan. I know. You ordered dessert. I know. You started an emotional conversation about your childhood. His expression became almost offended. I did not. Close enough. A quiet laugh escaped him, but then his face became serious again. Claire. Something in his tone made me stop. What? I do not want you to feel like you have to stay because I asked you to. The words were simple, but I understood what he was doing. He was giving me the choice I had told him mattered. I looked at him for a long moment. I know. Do you? Yes. I reached for my bag. And I am leaving because I want to. He nodded once. Something almost disappointed passed through his expression before he could hide it. I stood from the table. Ethan rose too. He was still taller than everyone around him, still composed, still impossible to ignore. But now I knew that none of those things explained the whole man. At the entrance, he walked beside me through the quiet restaurant. Outside, the city smelled clean after the rain. His driver was waiting at the curb. Mine was not. Ethan looked toward the car, then at me. Let me take you home. You do know I can get home without supervision. I know. Then why are you asking? He paused. Because I would like to make sure you get there. I searched his face. That sounds suspiciously considerate. Do not tell anyone. I smiled. Your reputation? Exactly. I hesitated for 1 second. Then I nodded. All right. The ride was quieter than dinner, but it was not awkward. The city moved beyond the window in ribbons of gold and red. I held my bag on my lap and watched familiar streets pass by. When the car finally stopped outside my building, I reached for the door. Claire. I turned. Ethan was looking at me with that same unreadable expression. Thank you. I smiled faintly. For what? He took a moment before answering. For not being afraid to disappoint me. My hand stopped on the door handle. I do not think that is what happened tonight. No. No, I looked at him. I think you finally realized I was never here. To become the person you expected. Ethan said nothing. I stepped out into the cool night air. Before closing the door, I leaned down slightly. And Ethan? Yes. You should try it sometime. His eyes narrowed. Try what? I smiled. Surprising yourself. Then I closed the door and walked toward my building without looking back. I made it halfway to the entrance before I realized something had changed. Not in him. Not yet. In me. Because for the first time in 11 months, I was no longer thinking about what Ethan expected from me. I was wondering what he might do when he realized I had stopped caring. The next morning, I arrived at the office 7 minutes early and immediately knew something was wrong. Not because anyone said anything. It was the opposite. The reception area was too quiet. Conversation stopped when I passed. 2 assistants looked at me, then quickly pretended to study their phones. By the time I reached my desk, I had decided there were only 3 possible explanations. Someone had spilled coffee on the quarterly reports. Someone had scheduled another impossible meeting. Or everyone knew I had spent the previous evening having dinner with Ethan. I sat down slowly. Good morning, I said. Nobody answered for a second. Then Daniel from accounting cleared his throat. Good morning, Claire. I looked at him. You look nervous. Do I? Like you are waiting for something to explode. His eyes widened. Nothing is exploding. Interesting choice of words. Before he could answer, the elevator opened. Ethan stepped out. Every person within sight suddenly remembered how to look busy. I almost laughed. He walked toward his office, his dark suit perfectly pressed, his expression unreadable. He passed my desk. Did not slow down. Did not look at me. Good morning, Claire. I looked up. Good morning. Then he kept walking. That was it. No secret smile. No strange glance. No reference to dinner. The door closed behind him. I stared at it for 3 seconds. That was disappointing, Daniel muttered. I turned toward him. What exactly were you expecting? Nothing. You are terrible at lying. He picked up a folder and disappeared before I could ask. Another question. For the next hour, I answered emails and organized Ethan's schedule. Everything was normal. Too normal. At 10:30, I carried a stack of documents into his office. Ethan was standing beside the windows, speaking quietly on the phone. He glanced at me once and pointed toward the desk. I placed the papers down. Usually, I would have left immediately. This time, I hesitated. Ethan ended the call. Was there something else? No, Claire. I turned back. Yes. His expression was neutral, but I could see the question behind it. You are staring. I folded my arms. You are being strange. I am working. You are avoiding me. His eyebrows lifted. Am I? Yes. And that is your professional assessment. Extremely professional. For 1 second, I thought he might smile. Instead, he walked toward his desk and picked up the top document. We have a meeting in 20 minutes. I stared at him. That is your response. It is the most useful one. Something inside me tightened. I did not know why I expected anything different. Maybe because last night had felt honest. Maybe because I had allowed myself to believe that honesty could survive daylight. Right, I said. Of course. I turned toward the door. Claire. I stopped but did not look back. About last night. My fingers tightened around the folder in my hand. What about it? The room went quiet. Nothing, Ethan said. I closed my eyes for half a second. Then I nodded. Good. Because I was going to say the same thing. I left before he could answer. The elevator doors had barely closed when I realized I was angry. Not at him exactly. At myself. I had spent one dinner seeing a side of Ethan that almost nobody saw, and somehow I had forgotten that morning always came. By noon, I had convinced myself to stop thinking about it. By 1:15, that plan was failing. At 1:30, I was standing beside the printer when my phone vibrated. I expected a work message. Instead, there was a text from an unknown number. The message contained only 6 words. You left your notebook in my car. I stared at the screen. Then another message appeared. And I read every page after you left. My heart stopped. For exactly 1 second. I looked toward Ethan's office. His door was closed. My fingers hovered over the screen. Then I typed, "You did what?" The response came immediately. I wanted to know who you were. I read the message twice. The anger from earlier returned, sharper this time. I walked across the office before I could talk myself out of it. Without knocking, I opened his door. Ethan looked up from his desk. Claire. I held up my phone. You read my notebook? He stood slowly. You left it in the car. That does not answer my question. His expression tightened. No, I stepped closer. No, I did not read every page. I stared at him. That is somehow your defense. For the first time since I had known him, Ethan looked genuinely uncomfortable. I opened it. Why? He looked at me. Really looked at me. Because I wanted to understand you. My anger did not disappear. But neither did the memory of last night. You could have asked. I know. The answer came immediately. No excuse. No argument. Just those 2 words. I stood there, breathing slowly. Then why did you not? Ethan glanced toward the notebook resting on the corner of his desk. Because asking you means accepting that you can say no. I followed his gaze, then looked back at him. And suddenly, I understood why the office felt so quiet that morning. Nothing had changed between us. That was the problem. Something had. Ethan had finally learned that wanting access to someone did not mean he was entitled to it. And now he was standing in front of me, waiting to see what I would do with that lesson. For several seconds, neither of us moved. My notebook sat on the corner of Ethan's desk, looking completely ordinary. Black cover, worn edges, a stretched elastic band. Yet suddenly it felt like the most important thing in the room. I walked toward it and picked it up. Ethan did not try to stop me. How much did you read? I asked. 1 page. I looked at him. 1. Then I realized I should not have opened it. And the message? His expression tightened slightly. I wanted you to come upstairs. I folded my arms. You could have sent one message saying you found my notebook. I know. You seem to know a lot of things after doing the opposite. For a moment, I expected him to defend himself. Instead, Ethan nodded. That is fair. The answer took some of the anger out of me. Not all of it, but enough for me to breathe. I looked down at the notebook in my hands. What page? The one with the building on Mercer Street. My eyes lifted slowly. That sketch was not just a building. It was the old bookstore where I used to hide on difficult afternoons when I was younger. I had drawn it from memory. The cracked window, the narrow awning, the tiny bell above the door. What did you think? I asked before I could stop myself. Ethan looked toward the notebook. I thought you remembered things differently than I do. What does that mean? I remember what happened. His voice was quiet. You remember how it felt. Something inside me softened. I hated that it did. That does not make opening it okay. I know. You are not going to argue? No, not even a little. No, I studied him. You are making this difficult. I am trying not to. I almost smiled. Almost. Then I slipped the notebook into my bag. Good. Ethan nodded once. Claire. I stopped near the door. What? I am sorry. There was no dramatic pause after it. No excuse attached. Just the apology. I looked at him for a long moment. Thank you. He seemed surprised that I had accepted it. That is all. Do not push your luck. That finally made him smile. A real smile. Small, but impossible to mistake. I turned to leave. Claire. I looked over my shoulder. What now? He hesitated. I had never seen Ethan hesitate over anything. Not in meetings. Not when people waited for his decisions. Not when an entire room seemed ready to follow whatever direction he chose. But now he looked at me as if the next sentence mattered more than any business deal he had ever made. Would you have dinner with me again? I stared at him. You already asked me that once. I know. And now? Now I am asking again. I waited. He seemed to understand that I wanted more. This time, he said carefully, you can say no without worrying about what happens on Monday. My expression changed before I could hide it. Ethan continued, nothing changes at work because of your answer. You mean that? Yes. And if I say no, then I respect it. I looked at him, really looked at him. The city beyond the windows glowed under a pale afternoon sky. Somewhere outside his office, phones rang and keyboards clicked. The world was moving exactly as it always had. But something inside this room had become very still. You know, I said, I almost believe that last night changed you completely. Ethan gave a quiet laugh. That would have been efficient. People are not efficient. I am learning that. I held the strap of my bag. Then learn one more thing. His expression became serious. What? Asking is not the same as earning a yes. I know. Good. I took one step toward the door, then stopped. But earning a second chance is possible. For the first time, Ethan looked completely speechless. I smiled. Thursday. He blinked. Thursday. 7 o'clock. Dinner. Do not make me regret this. His smile returned slowly. I will try not to. That is probably the most honest answer you could give. I opened the door. Before stepping outside, I looked back at him one last time. And Ethan? Yes. You are paying. He laughed quietly. Of course. I walked back to my desk with my notebook pressed against my side, aware that the office looked exactly the same as it had that morning. The glass walls, the elevators, the endless schedules waiting to be organized. But I was not the same person who had arrived 7 minutes early and wondered whether one dinner had meant anything. Maybe it had. Maybe it had not. Love was not a promise made over candlelight, and trust was not built because someone finally said the right words. It was built in the moments after the mistake, when a person had the chance to choose differently. Ethan had not become someone else overnight. Neither had I. But when Thursday arrived, I knew I would walk into that restaurant as Claire, not as anyone's expectation. And for the first time, I had a feeling Ethan would be waiting to meet me there.